Hello everyone, this is Nicole with Nicole Conway Speaks, and today we're going to talk about cycles, traditions, and curses. So what I am talking about is how we grow up a certain way and we have traditions. So one of the traditions in my family was I grew up Catholic and later I moved to become a Baptist, and now I have no denomination. I believe in God. So every Christmas Eve, we would go to midnight mass because my mother was a practicing Catholic. So all of my family, my grandkids, my children, all of us would go to midnight mass. No matter what church we went to, we always went there out of tradition because we were going with my mother. Okay, that's great. What about your grandmother made homemade eggnog? Because my grandmother, that's where the recipe came from in my family. So my grandmother taught my mother taught me and my sister, and then we are to teach the younger generation so they can pass the tradition on. Not only is it a tradition, we would drink the eggnog. We would make homemade eggnog the night after we came back from mass. So it was a good midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So that was part of our tradition. We would come home, we would make the eggnog, but it was made a certain way. Somebody had to stir the liquid on the stove and keep it from sticking. Somebody else had to beat the whites of the eggs so the meringue would be fluffy enough to put on top of the eggnog. And you had to do it a certain way. You had to put a right amount of sugar in it. You had to do all these different things. But the thing with the traditions is, why can't we change up some of those things? Like, why do we have to stick exactly to the recipe that was always given to us? Why can't we change it a little bit? So the reason I say curses is because sometimes we need to break generational curses in the form of, that's the way I've always done it. My mom, like, say for instance where you live, say for instance a family that grew up in the projects. It could be a great grandmother that lived in the projects first, and I could be saying my great great grandmother lived there, and my grandmother lived there, my mother lived there, and I lived there, and my kids are going to live there. They don't have to, just because that's where you started. And I'm not saying the projects is a bad place, because I've stayed in them before, but I didn't stay there. So what I'm saying is, it's up to us to change things, to break those curses that are on our families. Today I was watching Ayanna Van Zant, and she was speaking to Lisa Ray, Lisa Ray's mother and her daughter, and Lisa Ray's daughter. So 3 generations, and then Lisa Ray's daughter has a child as well. She's still little. 3 generations of anger, 3 generations of manipulation. So the problem was, Lisa Ray is a daddy's girl, and her dad was murdered. But the problem was, the mother and her father broke off. He went and stayed with his girlfriend. Well, Lisa Ray, in rebelling, went and stayed with them. So the mother was very angry that she chose the father over her, and she was by herself. She became very bitter because she was with this man for many years, and they were married, and she actually admitted that they were married and she stayed because of money. It wasn't so much that she was all into the relationship, she was there for money. Well, Lisa Ray watched her mother do the same thing and manipulate people with money. So in turn, she would manipulate her daughter with money. Did they have a relationship, any of them? No. So now they're all stuck in a house together during COVID, and they have to deal with each other's anger, and they didn't know how to cope. So they went to Ayanna, and of course she tried to help fix their lives, but they weren't ready to accept some things. But it was a generational curse throughout the years. And at times, as adult children, we blame our parents for a way that we have, the way they have parented us, or we didn't like certain things, or we saw things we didn't like. Remember, as children, we were sponges. Anything our parents did, whether good or bad, we gleaned the good and the bad. We took all of that in because we're sponges, and we're just taking every bit of what they're doing, how they're acting, how they're talking to other people when they're angry, how they're dealing with adversity. We take all that in, and guess what? That's all we know. So what do? When we have our children, we pass that on to them. But we can break that cycle. We don't have to keep doing things exactly. How about as you get older, you start taking an inventory of the things that maybe you weren't so happy with that your parents did, and you try to do something different. Because when you do something different, you break those curses. Those are cycles. So I use those three words on purpose: cycles and traditions and curses, because they kind of intertwine with each other. It's like if your pie fell because you didn't do something exactly the way it was supposed to, and somebody says, well, why did your pie fall or your cake fall? Well, that's how my grandmother did it, and if my grandmother did it, that's the right way. But why can't you change it up? Maybe you want to add a little vanilla to your pie. Maybe you want to flavor your crust, or maybe you want to do something a little different. It does not make it wrong or right because you decide to change it. That's the only way we get better. That's the only way we break generational curses, is to change things up a little. That's not to say that the way they raised us was wrong. Maybe that's all that they saw. Because I went through the stages of being resentful and rebellious and doing things I didn't have any business because I saw things that I didn't think I should have been around, or I didn't think my mother did things a certain way. I felt that she dictated to me, and we all have our own hang-ups about what we think our parents did or didn't do right or wrong. But you have to remember, sometimes what they gave you is all they had to work with. Yes? So we have to get past what so-and-so did, or I'm this way because this is what she did. What about taking that ownership to yourself and say, I didn't like how that went, but I'm going to do something a little different so I can break it. Our family, on the women's side, I'm learning now that they have problems with their knees. I didn't believe it. I used to watch my grandmother walk through the house, and she rocked when she walked because her knees were so bad. And during that time, they didn't do too many replacement surgeries on knees and stuff. I'm gonna get better. I'm gonna have the Lord pray. I'm gonna have somebody pray over my knees. I'm gonna be fine. Or I got some salve. Back in the day, they had everything that you could fix. For every ailment you had, they had something to fix it without having to go to the hospital. So I watched her go through that. I never knew how much pain she was in. I just saw her rock, and I thought that was part of who she was. And I loved her just the way she was. Then, as I got older, I watched my mother's knees deteriorate to the point where the cushion between her knees had worn down, and it was bone to bone. So, you don't believe, as people say, fat meets greasy until you have to deal with it yourself. So, since we have moved to New York from Texas, I have before I left, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So I have a lot of aches and pains and stuff in my body. But it activates even more when I'm stressed out, or when it's extremely cold outside. My bones just ache, especially at night. But I started having problems with my knees. And I just started having problems with my knees, I'm going to say less than a year ago. I'm going to say 6 to 8 months ago. And I was like, what's wrong? Well, maybe it's just the fibromyalgia. Then I started thinking back. My grandmother used to rock. And I noticed that when I stand up after I've been sitting a long period of time, I don't rock, but I have to stand still. And I used to watch my mother struggle. So I say all that to say is, because that's a cycle, and that's part of our makeup, and that's part of how our family is built, I have to do some things to better me so that I don't have to deal with that, or I don't have bone on bone and having to have a replacement. So I started walking again. I had stopped for a long time, but that's not something that my mom really had a chance to do because it had gotten too bad and it got too far. So, in breaking those cycles, do something different than what you saw your grandmother and your great grandmother do. Maybe with your gumbo, if you want to make gumbo, maybe you don't want to put crab, maybe you want to put crawfish. Change it up, make it yours. And in raising our children, we must break these curses, because if you don't, those curses, as well as your past trauma that you never dealt with, and I'm going to talk about traumas in another video, those will come up in your relationships with people, with your spouse, with your boyfriend, with your children. It'll come up in everything you do, and you won't understand why. Because they need to be broken. This is Nicole Conway with Nicole Conway Speaks. I don't want to make my videos too long because I know keeping people's attention span can be gone in not long. It doesn't take long for it to go. If you like this video, please check out the other videos that I have on my channel about mental health, about taking care of ourselves, about doing things differently so that we can live in a more healthy environment and space with peace. This is Nicole Conway with Nicole Conway Speaks. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Bye.